Welcome to the Fatigue Files, a podcast that explores fatigue conditions from as many angles as possible while pushing the boundaries of thinking about fatigue as a signal to the 21st century and beyond. Cutting-edge thinking, practical strategies, thought-provoking explorations. They're going to all be here, and I'm your host, Anna Greer, welcoming you to this edition of the Fatigue Files. So, welcome everybody, and this time I have with me the wonderful, the amazing Rebecca Tolin. Rebecca, will you introduce yourself and what you do to the audience?
Well, with that kind of introduction, I don't know what else I can add. Thank you, Anna, for the warm welcome. I'm so happy to speak with you again after being on the Neurocom Fatigue Summit. I am a mind-body practitioner, coach, and teacher. And I came into this field after a long 13 plus year healing journey with ME/CFS. I fell extremely ill after a series of shock traumas and kind of went down all the conventional and alternative routes and finally recovered through a branch of mind-body work that I fell in love with and returned my vitality in so many ways. So I now teach courses and work with clients who have a range of chronic fatigue, chronic pain, headaches, irritable bowel syndrome, and other symptoms that are caused by the brain and nervous system to really help people reconnect to their body and reclaim their innate well-being.
So the obvious question for me to ask you there is exactly what was this thing that you fell in love with?
Yes. Well, Anna, probably like you and so many people, I was trying to treat real physical symptoms with physical means, medications, supplements, treatments, and none of it was working. And I finally spoke with a woman who had ME/CFS and fibromyalgia and a lot of the things I did. And she, in this 3-hour conversation, explained to me, I am not sick. She actually said these words to me, "You are not sick." Now, if I had heard that 13 years prior, I would have probably punched her in the face. But she explained the nervous system and the brain's role in perpetuating chronic symptoms. And I had a bit of a paradigm shift when I understood this body of work that was brought originally to the West, at least by a physician named Dr. John Sarno. You've probably either not heard of him or you absolutely love his work. He wrote 4 best-selling books. And some people report just recovering from reading his books. He explained that when the brain senses a perceived threat or a real threat, it initiates a stress response in the nervous system. This happens due to what we would now call trauma, what John Sarno called repressed emotions. And it can create more severe physical symptoms and more prolonged physical symptoms than any pathological disease there is, because our brain and nervous system are always trying to protect us, and they can get frozen or stuck in this hypervigilant state. And it can cause massive amounts of exhaustion, which is sort of a shutdown state. Brain fog, spaciness is also associated more with a freeze or a shutdown state, as well as activation, anxiety, pain, migraines, so many other symptoms. And when I really learned the root cause of my symptoms, Anna, it made an immediate shift. I went from literally being bedbound. It was just in the winter of 2018, and I had been having a big flare up. And I was trying to really protect myself and not do much at all. I leapt out of bed and I ran around the block. And when I had this understanding and I stopped seeing myself as a sick person that could not heal or that needed some outer medication or person or thing to heal me, I immediately felt energy fill me. I felt a sense of empowerment and hope. And Then I did continue to have some symptoms because just that cognitive understanding alone was not enough. It was a paradigm shift. I literally stepped into a different reality where I realized these are real symptoms, but they are not caused by a pathological illness. It's not the same as somebody who has tumors, cancerous tumors, or rheumatoid arthritis. You can't find those sort of markers with the diagnoses I had. So that was the paradigm shift. And then I really went on to study some of the other pioneers in this field, notably Dr. Howard Schubiner, who's a modern day physician here in the United States, who really brought more practices to John Sarno's work. But again, with this underlying understanding that these symptoms are 100% real. We are in no way downplaying them, but you can recover by shifting the perception of danger, the state of the brain and the nervous system, by processing this backlog of emotions, by learning to regulate the nervous system, and by challenging yourself and starting to live your life again. In a way that you want, in a more healthy way, which then sends feedback to your brain and nervous system.
So how do you work with your clients, Rebecca? Because I think you've evolved your own approach from these antecedent inspirations, haven't you?
Yeah, because I think probably like you, Anna, you study with some of these greats, and there is absolutely no substitute for that. But I think we all kind of find our own way of expressing a body of work based on our experience. And what I teach is what helped me heal. I don't share or teach anything with students and clients that I don't have a direct personal experience with. And these days I do a lot more teaching in groups because I find the power of the collective is immense. People that have felt so disconnected for so long and so alone come together in live courses and also in an online community, and they suddenly see all these other people that are going through what they are, and we sort of support and encourage each other. So I do some one-on-one work, which is really important, but I find that there are massive shifts happening in the group courses that I teach. And so there's a few main components. The first one is really understanding the science, because when we are, this is my experience, and I know there are many ways to heal, and I honor all of those. But my experience is when I thought I was sick and broken and I needed to take just yet another dozen supplements and restrict my diet even more and restrict my sort of movement in the world even more, it made me feel sick and fragile. And I was never going to get better that way. So I teach the science and this basic paradigm shift of understanding that it's actually a sense of personal agency and empowerment that makes our brain and nervous system feel safe. And it's also softness and kindness and compassion. But we start sort of with the scientific understanding. Then we really move into some of the practices, which is learning to feel what we would call symptoms. First of all, we move from the sense of illness into symptoms, but then we move from symptoms into sensations. Because when we say we're fatigued or we're in pain, really, what is that? When you start bringing your awareness into your body through about 20 different somatic meditations that I've developed, you notice that there might be buzzing or pulsing or burning or dullness. There's actually a whole world of sensations. And as you start to discover that, interestingly, those often morph into an emotion. But whether it's a physical or an emotional sensation, we bring a lens of safety in our mind with safety messages, with an actual somatic exploration in the body. And that is sending signals back both cognitively and somatically to the nervous system that we are aware of the flight or fight or freeze state that it's trying to warn us of. And yet we are okay. We are okay. And so it sends these very visceral signals back. And a lot of people see shifts with one particular meditation called somatic tracking. The symptoms can dramatically decrease from doing the last thing that we normally want to do, which is bring our attention to the feelings of them. but we do it in sort of slow, titrated ways. And we also learn to bring in positive or neutral awareness in the body. So that can be by orienting to our environment, that can be tuning into a part of the body that feels okay, different types of breath work. We might also use some positive memories and notice how that makes us feel in our body. So for people who are just really disassociated, as I was, because we've been through so much trauma, there's very slow, gentle ways to start reconnecting to the body. And that's a really foundational part of the practices. There's also ways to regulate the nervous system, which are related to somatic practices, but it's also typically embodied. And then we start really challenging our limitations in a physical, felt, active way. We want to have foundational tools before we start sort of challenging activities that we want to do. So we'll do more of those, but with what I would call outcome independence, which is sort of being indifferent to the symptoms. Because when we're a hostage to those symptoms, it keeps retraining our brain that indeed those activities are unsafe for us. We need to retrain our brain that no, we can do these activities. We may have little flare-ups as we start walking and working and doing things more, but we do it in slow, titrated ways with a whole different framework. We realize we're literally retraining our brain like it's this puppy dog looking for guidance. And we need that sort of clear, consistent, compassionate guidance again and again.
So I'm hearing there two key themes. One is this pattern that people adopt unconsciously of dissociating from the body, escaping the sensations or the emotions because it's too challenging. And so there's a dissociative pattern there. And that the relearning of the association or the intimacy with the body and the emotions needs to be soaked with a level of deep self-compassion.
Absolutely. So well put. Because we are so often beating ourselves up for not getting better. I assume a lot of people listening to this podcast have had some experience with fatigue or know someone who has. And how common is it to beat ourselves up? Like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get up off the couch? Why can't I motivate? But it's not our fault. It is, if we could, we would, right? This is happening at an unconscious level of the nervous system. And so those sort of personality traits of being really self-critical, self-pressuring, hard driving, unfortunately fuel the symptoms even more because they're really creating this pressure cooker inside us where we're beating ourselves up, which is sending signals to the brain that we're really not safe and keeping us locked in. What happens is the flight or fight becomes directed internally. You're fighting yourself or you're running from your own emotions, which still perpetuates the flight-fight state. And that's what creates symptoms, right? It sends all the stress hormones through our limbs. It depresses digestion and the endocrine system and all the other systems that are not essential for our survival in the moment. So what I've really found is self-compassion, and I've trained with Kristen Neff and Chris Germer in mindful self-compassion, is such a natural antidote to self-criticism because we start learning how to treat ourselves as a friend or as we would treat a loved one and really acknowledging our emotions, acknowledging this is really difficult. I'm frustrated. I'm angry. I'm sad. There's grief, whatever it is, instead of denying it. And we also want to shift from the obsession with symptoms into what are those underlying emotions? And mindful self-compassion does that beautifully because the first step is really acknowledging how we feel. And then acknowledging our common humanity that so many people feel these same emotions. Everybody does. We're human. And then the third step of mindful self-compassion is kindness and really speaking and treating ourselves as we would treat a dear friend. And the operative question with self-compassion is, what do I need right now? And that's a question in which you're really asking, what's the deeper unmet need? And often it's an emotional need, but it could also be a physical need as well.
There's quite a lot of nuance here, isn't there? Because there are needs and needs. So, there's sort of levels here as well, the kind of nuance as well in relation to tuning into the body, understanding and allowing the empathy towards the symptoms, but also not falling for the trick of the endless running alarm system. So there's some complexities there, aren't there, Rebecca? And I'd love you to tease them out. Like, how do you frame the discernment involved in teasing apart its sort of deep, authentic needs and the landscape of that, knowing when there's something that really, really needs authentic sitting with and holding, or when it might just be a kind of need that's just not a deep, authentic need, but actually more of an impulse, more of a problematic, reaction type response. And then the thing around the symptoms, like the importance of the empathic understanding that, yes, this is the body speaking to me, and I want to hear that. I need to hear the underlying emotion, really feel that. But at the same time, you're also saying there's a way in which you're also bouncing gently, testing, and not necessarily believing the symptom as if it's a real thing that you need to be limited by. So where are the little nuanced pathways there?
Oh, that's such a rich, juicy question, and so many ways I can go. Well, this is why the understanding of the brain and the nervous system are essential, because these symptoms are real and you can have compassion for them, but you realize they're based on a false alarm. It's not a real alarm that is saying there's danger. It's actually a false alarm of danger. And so you really want to sort of use your conscious mind to retrain your unconscious mind, which is stuck in this pattern of red alert. I'm running from the tiger, but I've been doing this for years or decades. And so you're using these prefrontal brain centers to retrain that unconscious reactive limbic part of the brain. So in terms of the different level of needs, we could say, well, I need some potato chips right now. And that's probably more of a want. But what's beneath that? So if I'm having a craving like that, and believe me, I'm a lover of potato chips. There's nothing wrong with that. But if there's some sort of craving like that, it's really asking, well, what's the need beneath that? Well, I need some comfort. I am feeling really alone, lonely, scared, and I need a distraction from that. I need some sort of feeling of comfort in my body, some enjoyment. And sometimes you might still eat the potato chips, but you've brought in a little more awareness. Or you might be able to go a layer deeper and say, well, what really is the unmet need? Well, I need some human connection, or I need to feel better in my body. Is there a healthier way I can do that? Taking a bath, getting some body movement. But it's really kind of bringing in a deeper awareness. There is something driving me to do a behavior that may or may not be helpful for me, because imbalance will feed itself, right? So if you're in flight or fight, for instance, it will just keep fighting and running, right? If you're in shutdown, which is so common with fatigue conditions, your system will remain shut down, and no amount of time is going to heal that. You need some stimulation. You need gentle stimulation. You may need connection. You may need co-regulation with another human being. So it's kind of asking yourself and becoming more intimate with yourself. What is the need beneath that? What's the need beneath that? But not beating yourself up or guilting yourself if you do go for sort of the top level need of the potato chips or whatever the distraction is, because you're still ahead of the game if you bring in that awareness.
I think this is where the therapeutic process can be so helpful, because I think asking the question, what's the deeper need, for some people is a very difficult question to answer. And it takes time, doesn't it, to learn to sense the deeper layers, especially if we've habituated to dissociation, and especially if it hasn't felt safe for a long time to go there. And of course, I'm hearing you say that you're building a certain level of safety to permit people to go there. But there's a certain amount of psychotherapeutic awareness involved in this. And this is where I think working with someone who's therapeutically trained can be really helpful, because that person can hold a mirror up and actually ask questions that really help you access or see the pattern in the deeper material that by yourself you might never find.
Yes.
Do you find in your work, Rebecca, that the quality of the therapeutic mirroring is also a very key part of what you're doing?
Yeah, I think it's so important to have another person to be able to discuss these things with. Now, I personally like working in a more somatic way, so it's not just sort of talk therapy, whether I'm working with a client, or I often recommend that clients work with someone who is trained as, say, a somatic therapist in addition to the courses I teach. For that reason, Anna, I mean, there are blind spots, but there's also this principle called co-regulation that comes from polyvagal theory, where when you're with someone who has a regulated nervous system, your nervous system can more easily regulate and find safety. Now, when your nervous system regulates, that shifts how you think, how you feel, and how you act. And your own inner clarity is going to come much more easily. Absolutely. When you're not in fight, fight, freeze. So we can sit through a whole therapeutic session, but if we're just in our head and we're dysregulated, and even the person we're with is dysregulated, you're not going to have the same level of understanding and clarity if you can come into a regulated state in your nervous system. And I really believe each person has their own inner wisdom. So for me, I like to guide people home to what that is for them. Each person knows much more deeply what they truly need and what their truth is than I could know for them. But you're right, holding that space and that guidance is really important for some people.
Definitely. And it was really the space holding and the mirroring. I mean, I think therapies operate in so many different ways. And I agree with you that one of the essential things is deep co-regulation. And the kind of co-regulation that goes beyond mere rapport into a somatic, both parties in a way forming a somatic loop, body to body, through nervous system connection and co-regulation. But I also think the mirroring has to be as well quite psychotherapeutically astute. So in that context, being able to help maneuver through the nuances, and perhaps the client then makes connections that they haven't made before, that give them paradigmatic shifts, these moments of insight, which your own story shows. Those moments of insight can be truly transformative. They can literally unlock a blocked state or shift a belief structure that has been dictating somebody's experience for years. I think it was one of the co-inventors of NLP, I think it was Richard Bandler, who said, we get traumatized in an instant. Why do we believe it has to take decades to de-traumatize? And so there can be these really powerful instantaneous shifts, but then there's also this need, paradoxically, for this slower, attuned sensing process that we either give to ourselves or we get from a therapist. And
Exactly.
For me personally, one of the deepest ways that I've learned to give it to myself is through meditation. And I find now that I don't need to ask questions about what's coming up so much as simply allow it to come up and to allow it to move somatically through my system, through my neurology, as energy that is quite neutral, even though it comes packed with an emotional charge. I don't anymore feel the need to label it or think about it in any conscious way. That's just kind of where I've personally gone. And for me, that's been a really profound journey of self-intimacy. But the intimacy with the self is double layered. It's the intimacy, yes, with the egoic structures, the patterns, the thought habits, the habituated emotional responses, but also another dimension of self, which is this ever-present awareness that is silently holding, compassionately loving all of that.
Yeah, I think that for me, my own journey crosses over with what you're describing too, Anna, because I started meditating before I had the real breakthrough with my health as a primary focus, as well as spending more time in nature. Now, nature helps us co-regulate. Meditation can do that. If you have access to that, it's different for everyone. An animal can help us do that as well. But I was having different meditations where I really realized this, what the yogis teach is this internal state is mirrored in our external state. So what's happening at the deeper levels of our mind is happening in our physical body.
Mm.
So meditation was really important for me as well. And I think I'm coming around too in my work now to bring in more sense of awareness, even as we're feeling our body sensations, instead of doing it directly from the sort of locus of the rational mind, which can fixate on a body part, feeling spacious awareness inside our body, and the actual enlivenment in the body can become enhanced as we awake our awareness in different parts of the body, and the body itself is this sort of living field.
Yes, absolutely. And there we're getting into proprioception, aren't we? We're getting into interoception and exteroception. And the awareness of awareness is a really beautiful thing that I have found increasingly useful with thought loops. Because I find that, if you start fighting a thought loop with opposing thoughts, you're kind of in the same energy, aren't you? You're sort of going backwards and forwards. And there's something really beautiful about taking your attention from the thought loop, not fighting it, not correcting it, simply bringing your awareness to the awareness of awareness. And simply doing that, I think, allows a calming in the somatic field. And when you stay holding your awareness of awareness, of course, the thought loop eventually over time through habituation gets quieter anyway on its own. It's a bit like something, it's like a radio gradually getting turned down.
Exactly. And it's, I think of it too, also like a stray dog that's not being fed anymore. Absolutely. Because you can also, there's different ways to bring in this awareness of the thought loops. You can actually feel sensations of thinking.
Yes.
And that is actually just a sensation. It's electrical impulses. Also bringing in sort of awareness to the body can sort of drain the attention from the rational centers of the mind. But ultimately, I do believe awareness, awake awareness, consciousness, it's called many things in different traditions, is what is creating, maintaining, and destroying all forms in the world. And as we can expand our own awareness into that, there is deep healing and restorative potential.
Absolutely. And I'm really struck by some of the latest physics that really points to the nature of the universe as being like Indra's net, a sort of networked consciousness full of light and vibration that is ultimately loving. And contacting that, for me, is revolutionary because it absolutely transforms one's entire orientation to life. And in terms of like settling the system, it produces the profound sense of safety, almost at a cellular level. When you really contact that, when you really let go into that, something arises in the self that is just so expansive and so beatific and so calm and so secure and grounded. And it's simultaneously deeply somatic and emotionally calm and intellectually satisfying and spiritually expansive. To me, that's the ultimate healing, this coming to this awakened consciousness, to realize that that's ultimately who we are. That is absolutely healing. And of course, it enables us to hold reality in a way where no matter what arises, we're okay. We are okay, no matter what happens. Even if we're upset, angry, whatever, there's that expansive calm, nevertheless, that is simultaneously present, which is extraordinary.
It's just so beautiful to hear you describe it, and it brings in more awareness as I'm listening to you. And what you're describing is described by so many spiritual and religious traditions, but people can access it in nature, right? In a completely secular way. And yes, I do believe it is at the heart of being. It's at the heart of healing. But this state of sort of open, expanded awareness you're describing, which I have experiences with, it's always sort of fleeting. Nothing needs to change in that state. And actually, that's a state I fell into. I would call it a state of grace before having my healing breakthrough. I had really just tried so hard to fight myself and fight the reality of being extremely sick, of being housebound in the prime of my life and losing so many people and my career and so many dreams I had. And when I just sort of started practicing meditation, yoga, forest bathing, nature immersion, I fell into this expanded okayness. Everything was okay. I actually hurt a lot in my body. It did not feel good to be in my body, but it was okay. And nothing had to change. And what's so interesting from that state of sort of aliveness that is very much embodied in the self, but so beyond the self. And as you described, the interconnectedness with all that is that these insights and awakenings and awarenesses we may need to benefit our so-called separate self, our human self, can come to us so much more easily and readily.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that steps into that space of not knowing, but somehow you do know. Knowledge comes in it's extraordinary. You know, when you put the puzzling mind aside and you are in that place, it's as if there's a higher wisdom that operates and things come through and you find that you're led to what you need. So, you know, for that surrendering, that letting go is often a prelude to healing breakthroughs. It can also be, of course, that once we open in these states, we can also go into very dark places, because precisely what we're invited to then is this healing process. For some, it's slow and gentle. For others, it's more eruptive and problematic. But I think the more that people have the skill set that we're talking about here with somatic sensing, understanding the neurobiology of the self, and all of that knowledge that depotentiates such things as shame can be depotentiated by understanding this is just a neurophysiological reality. This is just how humans are constructed. It's not that there's a problem with me. This is just how we are. And once we get that and understand the operating system, as it were, of, you know, the body, the brain, and the way it all works, there's a capacity then to hold some of these states much, much more skillfully.
Exactly. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because I think that for me and some people I see, there can be what's often called a spiritual bypass,
Yes.
where we're perhaps accessing higher states of consciousness, but we're disembodied and even disavowing our human pain and trauma and emotional world. Or it can be the other way. We're too maybe fixated on our kind of psychosis in our physical body and maybe not opening to something more expansive. But I really found the blending of these was essential. And, I want to say too, for people who might be listening to this and think, what are they talking about? It sounds esoteric, or I haven't experienced it, or I don't want to meditate in a cave for years. I mean, I found these things, these more open, expansive states come from enjoyment often, right? It's like creativity, play, nature, whatever we enjoy that can kind of put us into the zone or the present moment. This is deeply healing. And for those of us who have dealt with fatigue or other chronic conditions, it's so hard to give ourselves permission often to just find enjoyment, something that we can let go with abandon into the present moment. And what I teach is that is profoundly healing. There is probably nothing more healing than that. Not to mention enjoyable, which is really important to live a rich life, to access enjoyment, even when there are really uncomfortable symptoms and sensations. Yeah, it's actually possible to experience both at once. And then the sense of enjoyment or peace or creativity or awe at a sunrise or a sunset, that is signaling back to the brain and nervous system that you're safe, that you're not running from a tiger. And therefore, it will shift the biochemistry of the body in radical ways.
And it's also doing something else, isn't it? Which is very important for healing as well. It's beautifully giving deep permission for self-expression. Yes. And self-expression is vital. And sometimes it's that playful creativity, as you say, and you get all those biochemical benefits. But sometimes people with fatigue have not been able to self-express their authentic feelings in a situation. And sometimes expressing your authentic feelings in a situation can feel uncomfortable if you're not used to doing it. But I find with so many clients that the energy it takes to hold down what you really think and really feel in a situation is in itself problematic. So there's a real case here, isn't there, for skillfully enabling people to quietly, in a grounded, self-loving, other-loving, compassionate and clear way, to be able to say, actually, this is what I feel, and to own it.
Absolutely. Self-expression and authenticity are so integral to well-being on the deepest levels. And it's true what you say, holding back or holding down what we really think and feel takes tremendous energy, or living from a facade, as we're trained to do in our cultures where we have these masks on. That takes so much energy. And I know myself, and I hear from a lot of clients and students, that socializing can be one of those things that really sucks energy. And obviously there's more energy required when you're interacting, but I think a lot of that is because of these different masks we put on, where we're not feeling we can really be true and express how we really feel. And so, yeah, the first step to me is really acknowledging to yourself how you feel. Like, I'm really frustrated with this. I'm sad. I'm ashamed, really naming it. And then as you get clear in yourself, you can learn to communicate to people in your life who are safe to communicate your true feelings in your inner world with. And that allows authenticity and vulnerability, which can be profoundly meaningful and healing experiences.
Yeah, and it can start in really little ways, can't it? I remember a long time ago, a therapist I was working with was encouraging me to express my feelings in a particular relationship, to gain a sense of agency. Because weirdly, I was someone who came across as very strong, but I was always giving myself away. I was always giving away my power. And she used the television remote as the starting place. She said, look, just occasionally take the remote and choose which program you want to watch. It was such a small it was such a small thing, but it was a little chink, practicing it gave me a little bit more confidence to start expressing my genuine sense of agency, not the kind of pushy power I developed, but the more tender, the stuff that was closer to how I was authentically feeling. And I think we can start in very little ways, maybe saying, actually, I don't feel like doing that thing that you've asked me to do. Just little ownerships of, especially for those who are people pleasers, being able to say, actually, I'd love that to do that for you, but I really can't, is a massive step. It's a huge step, but it's tiny, but it's huge at the same time.
Oh, it is. It is. When some people read John Sarno's books, they say, that's like my biography, because he described the personality traits that are associated with these chronic symptoms. And it's the people pleaser, the perfectionist, very conscientious do-gooder that holds in our emotions. And so those shifts you're describing, Anna, they seem little, but they are profound in reclaiming our energy to flow through us, our voice to flow through us, which is a form of self-expression, which kind of keeps that energy in motion instead of clamping it all down. And it can be so scary, because the reason we develop those patterns is we typically got messages from early in life in our family or the culture that it wasn't safe to express ourselves, because maybe we weren't met with acceptance or compassion. And so then we have internalized those voices in those ways. So we're shifting first our awareness and then our behaviors. And it does shift relationships, and it can enhance relationships. It can challenge relationships. I found that I did make some new and different friends through my healing journey, because some of the previous conversations that I had in my life before I got sick were just not conversations I was interested in having anymore. I would feel them sucking the life force out of me. They were sort of very surface conversations. And then the friends and the friendships I cultivated, and some of them were older friends that were able to come along for the ride, were just a deeper, full-bodied way of interacting.
Yeah, and much more authentic. I mean, I'm struck here by the way in which, by not expressing our true self, we block intimacy first, because we're not known as we really are, right? And that's a lonely thing, to block intimacy, whether or not we realize it. We put ourselves in a quintessentially lonely position because we remain unheard and unseen at some fundamental level. And, we want to be heard and seen at some fundamental level. That's deeply healing, not least by ourselves. But then there's that thing about taking up space, that when we express our genuine feelings, desires, or whatever, we're in a sense claiming our right to space, to ownership of space in our own right in the world. And I'm struck by how these fatigue illnesses take our space away. We're kind of put indoors. We shrink, our worlds shrink. And there's something here about expansion, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. And expansion expands energy. And you're right, with these fatigue conditions, and I know and experienced this for years, as I'm sure you did, is there is a smallness, there is a sense of needing to conserve energy, needing to conserve money. And then that can really affect your sense of self-esteem, especially when we've been basing our confidence on what we do in the world or what we earn, and we can't do that anymore. So there can be this real shrinking and contracting. And we want to honor that movement and understand it while starting to expand and express our own authenticity. And it's incredible how that can shift the contraction and the freeze into the expansion and the mobility at a nervous system level, as well as in our life, in our relationships, in our financial life, certainly with our health.
Yeah, absolutely. Expansion, I think, is a wonderful note to end on. It's a high note.
Yes.
Rebecca, thank you so much for yet another lovely conversation.
Oh, I enjoyed it so much, Anna. Thank you.